for annulment or worse, public condemnation. A man had the legal and spiritual right to his wife's body. And if he tried to protest, well, you were being disobedient. The church might preach about love and unity, but in practice, it leaned heavily on obedience and duty. And here's a dark twist. Some marriages didn't involve adults at all. Noble girls could be betrothed as early as age 12, while consummation was technically supposed to wait until puberty. Let's just say that wasn't always respected. Historians still argue whether early consummation was the norm or the exception, but the stories that survive aren't hopeful. You lie back, the rough wool blanket scratching your skin, your breath catching as the shadows stretch across the ceiling. Maybe your new husband mumbles something kind. Maybe he just does what he thinks he's supposed to. Either way, it's over quickly. Or maybe it's not. There are no guarantees. Afterward, you're expected to sleep soundly, blood on the sheets, and expectations satisfied. Congratulations, you're a wife now. You've crossed a line that can't be uncrossed, and you did it. In a world that gave you no map, no support, and no room for uncertainty. And you thought wedding planning was stressful. You wake the next morning sore, confused, and already being judged whether by your in-laws, your servants, or your own body. Because now comes the second act of this grim performance, proving that you are a virgin, not emotionally, not spiritually, physically. The first thing anyone's looking for is blood. If there wasn't any, you're already in trouble. In Tudor England, a woman's worth, especially in marriage, was often tied to the mysterious, misunderstood idea of virginity. And like many misunderstood things, it came with rituals, tools, and, frankly, absurd beliefs. There were entire methods created to test whether a girl was truly pure, some of them invasive, humiliating, and, to modern ears, downright medieval. Ever heard of a chastity belt? While actual use of metal contraptions is debated, many surviving examples are likely later forgeries or jokes. Tudor people did worry obsessively about female chastity. Wealthy families went to great lengths to protect it, which meant isolating daughters, supervising their social lives, and yes, sometimes using physical devices, like sewn-up shifts, reinforced undergarments, or locked rooms. But it didn't stop there. There were also so-called virginity tests. Midwives and matrons might be called in to examine the bride before or after the wedding night. They looked for signs, a tightness in the body, an unbroken hymen, which, spoiler, isn't an accurate test at all, or the way she walked after her first night. That's right, or limp. Your waddle, or your posture could be interpreted as evidence. Or not, depending on how convincing you were. And if you didn't bleed, well, then came the accusations. Maybe you weren't a virgin. Maybe you'd fooled everyone. Maybe, and this was common, you were accused of witchcraft. Yes, because only a witch could trick a man into believing she was pure when she wasn't. That's the logic you're living under. In some regions, there were folk remedies to fake the bleeding. You might hide a pricked finger under the covers, or use a sponge soaked in animal blood. Desperate. Yes, but sometimes necessary. Your entire future could hinge on a single red stain. Historians still argue whether these rituals were widespread or exaggerated by moralists and clergy, but records do show that the presence or absence of blood could affect dowries, inheritance, and social standing. In other words, one biological detail might determine whether your husband keeps you or sends you back. And if you were noble, multiply the pressure tenfold. Royal marriages had to be legally consummated. No room for discretion. Henry VIII's sister, Margaret Tudor, had her bedding ceremony documented, including accounts of the sheets, witnesses, and the next morning's inspection. Not exactly a private honeymoon. Let's talk about the bedding ceremony for a second. In many Tudor weddings, especially among elites, it was customary for guests to escort the couple to their bedchamber. There was music, there were jokes. Sometimes there was actual cheering. It sounds festive until you realize you're being paraded like livestock. The couple might be undressed by yes, strangers helping you out of your wedding clothes, and tucked in under the covers like a pair of reluctant dolls. Then the guests left, or sometimes they didn't. In certain cases, someone stayed behind, just in case. In lower-class homes, things weren't always as formal, but the pressure was still real. Mothers-in-law might expect to wash the sheets. Neighbors might whisper about how quickly your husband seemed to return to the tavern. And if the community decided something wasn't right, word spread fast. You could become a punchline, or worse, a pariah. And remember, there's no privacy, no therapists, no way to explain that you just weren't ready, that maybe it hurt, or that you were terrified. If you didn't bleed, and he complained, your voice didn't matter. So what did you do? You learned to fake it, to smile, to pray, to hope that no one asked too many questions. You might quietly ask a midwife for advice. She might whisper back an old wives' tale, like eating pomegranate seeds to tighten the body, or pressing rose petals between your thighs to restore purity. Utter nonsense, of course, but better than nothing when you're out of options. Oh, and if your husband failed to perform, well, that wasn't his fault. It was yours, obviously. Maybe you were too cold, too intimidating. Maybe your womb was hostile. Men who couldn't consummate were sometimes pitied, but women who caused that failure, they were dangerous. Even the church weighed in. While the clergy insisted on the sanctity of marriage, they also taught that a woman's role was to be open and receptive, to accept pain, to yield, and to never, ever suggest that something had gone wrong. You lie there, curled under the coarse linen, wondering what your body has betrayed on, what story the sheets will tell when morning comes. There's no mercy in this game, only survival. You're trying to breathe normally again. But it's hard when every inhale feels like it's pressing against a set of invisible rules you never agreed to. And yet they govern every flicker of your desire, every shift of your body. Welcome to the theology of Tudor bedroom life, where the church has a lot of thoughts, about what just happened to you. It starts with one commandment: be fruitful and multiply. That's not just a nice suggestion. In Tudor England, it's practically the mission statement of your marriage. If you're not making babies, something's wrong. And if you're enjoying the act that makes babies, something might be even more wrong. The church taught that S3X was necessary but dirty, holy but also humiliating. A paradox neatly wrapped in scripture and delivered through weekly sermons, confessors, and community shame. You're supposed to endure it, not crave it. You're supposed to lie there, eyes to the rafters, praying silently that your duty ends quickly and successfully with conception. And it's not just you. Your husband is also caught in this web of divine contradictions. He's been told since boyhood that his urges are sinful, unless they're directed toward his wife, within marriage, on certain days, at certain times, facing a certain direction, in a posture approved by God, which is to say, missionary, always. Anything else, that's straying into dangerous, possibly diabolical territory. There were actual church manuals, long tedious lists of forbidden acts, positions, and timings. Want to be intimate during Lent? Sinful. During Advent? Forbidden. On a holy feast day? Out of the question. Wednesday, Friday, or Sunday? Risky. Basically, if you wanted a clean calendar square for sanctioned intercourse, you might be looking at one Tuesday in late April, and only if you didn't sneeze wrong that morning, and God forbid either of you shows enthusiasm. That's not just improper, it's sinful. Lust, even within marriage, was a threat to the soul. So if you, God help you, enjoy the act if you arch your back, sigh too loudly, or seem to want it too, flirting with eternal damnation. Not just you, either. Your husband could be blamed for stirring up your lust, because a woman's body was considered naturally more carnal, more temptable. You were Eve, remember, always one apple away from ruining everything. So, you lie still, you fake indifference, you try to perform purity, which is ironic, because the performance is its own sin. But no one really wants honesty here anyway. And if you're unlucky enough to have questions, to be curious, or confused, or terrified, you can't just walk down to the local bookstore. Literacy among women is rare, and even the men mostly read religious texts. The most available source of guidance is likely the priest, who isn't exactly the best person to ask, "What's this pain I feel when?" You get the idea. Still, people found ways to talk. Quietly. In kitchens, over herbs. Midwives, again, became the unofficial sex educators of Tudor life. They knew things the clergy refused to say. They whispered truths. They saw the aftermath of ignorance daily: bruises, tears, miscarriages. But their advice was folk-based, and often laced with superstition. And here's your quirky fact of the night. Some believed that to conceive a boy, you had to lie on your right side afterward, and think warm thoughts. To make a girl, lie on your left and imagine cold water. Not science. But in a world ruled by mystery, myths filled the void. It wasn't all doom and gloom though. Rare as they were, there are letters from the period that suggest genuine affection between spouses. A few couples defied the system, found joy in each other, even played a little. But they were the exception, not the rule, and almost never spoke of it openly. Because being too happy in bed was suspicious. In public, The church clung tightly to control, always suspicious of anything that looked like pleasure. For example, loud moaning during intercourse. That might be a sign of demonic influence. That's right. Some believed that excessive pleasure wasn't just sinful, it might mean a succubus had joined in. Historians still argue whether the clergy truly believed these teachings, or simply used them to keep society in check. Either way, the fear stuck. It seeped into every corner of your consciousness. You began to police yourself, your thoughts, your sounds, your heartbeats. You tiptoe through marriage like it's a confessional. Every choice weighed, every desire questioned, and always the same dull message echoing. This isn't for you. It's for God, for family, for the continuation of property lines and bloodlines and national alliances, but not for your pleasure. Certainly not for your voice. You may feel like a stranger in your own body, a ghost in your own marriage. And somehow, that's what virtue looks like here. That's what the church wanted: quiet, unquestioning obedience. Swaddled in shame, but you're still here, breathing, enduring. Maybe you even whisper to yourself, in the quiet of the night, that you're more than this script, more than this ritual. That there's a part of you still curious, still alive. That's the part the church couldn't crush, though it certainly tried. You pull your shawl tighter around your shoulders, staring into the flickering hearth as another long night sets in. Maybe it's been weeks since the wedding, maybe months, and still, something isn't right, not with your body, not with the way things feel when he climbs into bed, not with the terrible ache that lingers after he leaves. You've tried prayer, biting your lip, staying silent, but the pain won't go. And now the whispers begin. You've heard them before. At the market, behind church pillars, from older women with crooked fingers and eyes that always seem to see too much. If something goes wrong in bed, it isn't because you weren't prepared or informed. No, the explanation is far more exciting. Demons, witches, and your wandering womb. Yes, the wandering woman, actual belief held by Tudor physicians, passed down from classical antiquity. They thought your womb could literally travel around your body like a mischievous ferret, causing suffocation, convulsions, or even madness. Feeling short of breath, your womb's probably up near your lungs. Mood swings must have lodged near your heart. And what cures this roving menace? S3X, or, more accurately, a man's S3 dual attention. Because, of course it does. You see, Tudor medicine wasn't so much about anatomy as it was about balance. Everything boiled down to humors: hot, cold, wet, dry. A woman, by nature, was considered cold and wet. S3X with a man, obviously, was supposed to warm you up, realign your humors, keep the womb in place. So, if S3X hurt, if it made you cry, you needed more of it, for your health. You're welcome. But when that didn't work, and it rarely did, people turned to midwives and magic. These were the secret healers of Tudor households, often the only ones who truly listened to women. They came with bundles of herbs, whispered charms, and more experience than any male physician with a university degree. They'd hand you chamomile to relax your nerves. They'd mix penyrol tea for delayed cycles. They might even place protective amulets near your bed to ward off bad spirits. Of course, this made them targets. The same midwife who helped bring your firstborn into the world could be accused of witchcraft a year later. Because if a woman helped another woman in pain, and especially if she offered relief, someone, somewhere, was bound to find that suspicious. And if you dared to complain too loudly, if you spoke about the pain, the fear, or the coldness in your husband's touch, well, then perhaps you were bewitched, or bewitching. Women who spoke too freely about their intimate lives were often labeled dangerous, manipulative, unnatural. Some even faced punishment or church penance for unwomanly speech. Meanwhile, the men had their own problems, but they didn't suffer silently. If your husband couldn't perform, there was a parade of excuses. Too much black bile, a cold wind, a cursed object in the chamber. And yes, sometimes it was your fault for being too dominant, too frigid, or ironically too seductive. The logic loops like a cursed carousel, and you're always the one dizzy at the center. Sometimes, couples sought outside help. Not doctors, those were expensive and rarely useful for these matters, but cunning folk. The village healers and hedge witches, who knew the old ways. One might give your husband a dried weasel heart to carry in his shoe. Another might bury a lock of your hair beneath the bed. It sounds strange now, but in a world without answers, these rituals were the answers. And through it all, your body remains a mystery to you, to your husband, to the world. Pain during S3X isn't something you can explain. Because there's no language for it. There's no diagnosis. No understanding. You just suffer quietly, because to say it out loud would be unthinkable. Besides, what would you even say? The doctors of the day offer little help. They still believe that a woman must release seed to conceive. So if you're not pregnant yet, it's because you didn't enjoy yourself enough. That's right. Pleasure is a sin. Unless you're not having babies. Then it's your fault for not enjoying the sin. It's a logic pretzel so twisted it could strangle you. Historians still argue whether ordinary women truly believed all of this, whether they saw their own bodies as haunted houses, or just played along to survive. Some suggest that Tudor women passed down their own counter knowledge, their own quiet truths hidden beneath layers of superstition. Maybe your grandmother whispered a different story while teaching you to sew. Maybe your sister offered you a knowing glance that meant more than words ever could. So you hold on to what little you know. You try the rosemary sachet. You avoid cold baths. You light a candle and mutter a charm passed down through 5 generations of women, with tired eyes and secrets sewn into their hems. Maybe it helps. Maybe it doesn't. But it gives you the illusion of control, and sometimes that's enough. The fire has burned low now. You listen to the wind scraping against the shutters and think about your womb, your fear, your silence. You wonder if you're broken, or if the world is just too cruel to let women be whole. You sit on the edge of the bed, staring down at the bowl of vinegar and herbs by your feet. The water is still warm, its sharp scent rising into the air like an accusation. This is what purity demands now. Not peace, not understanding, just burning discomfort and rituals designed to scrub away your humanity. Because here in Tudor England, being a pure woman isn't something you are, it's something you constantly maintain. Often painfully, and marriage doesn't let you off the hook. If anything, it only makes the pressure worse. You were told that once you were married, your body would belong to your husband, but no one mentioned that it would also remain under the scrutiny of everyone else. Purity, even for a wife, was a kind of ongoing performance. Cleanliness, chastity, obedience, restraint, all measured daily through how you looked, how you moved, even how you smelled. Enter the vinegar washer, popular Tudor cleansing method, where women soaked cloth in vinegar and sometimes lemon, rosewater, or alum, and used it internally. Why? To disinfect, to tighten, to prove that they were still fresh. This wasn't medicine. It was mythology, masquerading as hygiene. And it hurt. Some even carried scented sachets under their skirts to cover up their natural scent. As if having a human body was something shameful, you dabbed perfume behind your ears, tucked lavender sprigs into your bodice. Anything to keep up the illusion that you were untouched, innocent, and odorless. Heaven forbid someone detect that you'd actually shared a bed with your husband and, worse, might have liked it. Even after marriage, if a woman seemed too ready, or not modest enough, suspicion followed. Some believed a woman's virtue could be read on her face. Too bold, too witty, clearly impure, too pale, probably sick from guilt. You were walking a tightrope over a pit of whispers and stares, hoping no one caught a glimpse of you stumbling. And then came ritual cleansing. In many homes, especially wealthier ones, women were expected to follow strict bathing routines, tied to their menstrual cycles, and post-intercourse purity. The church might not have provided clear guidelines on personal care, but tradition filled the gap. Women were told to soak in cold water after intimacy to cool the blood. Some sprinkled salt in the water to ward off sin. Others fasted after S3X, believing that cleansing the soul required denying the body. And if you didn't do these things, if you skipped the vinegar, forgot the salt, or seemed too unbothered, there were consequences. Small at first sight, from your mother-in-law, silence from neighbors. But they could grow. Reputation was everything. Once sullied, it rarely recovered. In a strange twist, some women took this obsession with purity to extremes. There are records of noble women sleeping with sharp pins, or tiny crosses tucked into their chemise as symbols of constant vigilance. Others recited prayers during intercourse to keep their minds chaste, even as their bodies obeyed. It was a delicate dance between obligation and resistance. You were there, but not really there. You gave your body, but guarded your soul. And remember, there was no safety net. No doctor to explain infections. No one to tell you that burning and pain weren't signs of guilt, but signs of harm. You suffered, and you bore it. Because that was what women were supposed to do. Here's your quirky tidbit. Some Tudor women believed that inserting certain cold stones or crystals before the wedding night could preserve their virginity. Literally, keep it locked in. The logic is nonsense, but the desperation is real. These women were trying to hack biology with whatever tools they had: folklore, hearsay, and blind hope. Historians still argue whether this obsession with ritual purity stemmed more from religion or from patriarchy. In truth, it was both a tangled knot of church doctrine, social control, and inherited fear. And you, standing barefoot in your chamber, are caught at the center of it. The worst part, the mental weight, the constant fear that you'll get it wrong, that you'll offend someone just by existing too boldly, that the woman in the market who smiled at your husband will now whisper about you over ale, that you'll be blamed for not conceiving, or worse, for enjoying something that was supposed to be sacred, silent, and shameful. So you keep washing, you follow the rituals, you light the candle, dip the cloth, pray the whispered prayer. You keep your legs closed when walking, your voice soft when speaking. You nod and smile, and try not to flinch when his hand brushes yours at dinner. Because even in marriage, your purity isn't a chapter. You finish, it's a page you have to rewrite. Every day, in someone else's ink. The shutters creak against the wind as another night closes in, and you brace yourself not just for what might come under the covers, but for how it must be done. Because here in Tudor England, even your position during S3X has moral implications. And heaven help you if you appear too interested in what's going on. There's a prescribed way to do it. One way, the church called it the natural position, what we now refer to as missionary. Man on top, woman beneath, both solemn and silent, presumably thinking of God or sheep or tax rolls. Any deviation from this proper form could be seen as sinful, and possibly a sign that you'd been corrupted by foreign ideas. Or worse, your own imagination. And if you ever dared to initiate anything, or moved your hips too much, or, heaven forbid, made a sound that could be interpreted as pleasure, well, now you're suspect. The prevailing belief was that a woman's role in bed was to be passive, accepting, docile, like a warmed-up porridge bowl. You laugh at the absurdity, but quietly, because if you laughed in real life, someone might accuse you of being lewd. Some women were clever. They found ways to assert a bit of control, subtle touches, glances, or well-timed complaints about aching backs to shift things into a more comfortable arrangement. But these moments were rare and risky. If your husband was devout or insecure, might interpret your creativity as defiance. And defiance was dangerous, because S3X wasn't just physical, it was a matter of power and submission, and not just within the marriage. It was believed that a man's vigor reflected his moral and social dominance. The more manly he was in bed, the more favorably he was seen in public. Conversely, a woman's virtue was tied to her stillness, her silence, her willingness to endure. If she enjoyed herself too much, or worse, took initiative, she was labeled unnatural, manipulative, or demonic. Yes, demonic. Remember the whole medieval holdover about lust being a sign of the devil's influence? That didn't just disappear. Some preachers warned that a woman who enjoyed S3X too openly might be possessed, or cursed, or harboring the spirit of Lilith, infamous first wife of Adam, who, in some tales, refused to lie beneath him. This wasn't just sermon fodder. It was the stuff of legal records, whispered rumors, even annulment trials. If a marriage went sour and a man wanted out, one of the easiest ways was to accuse his wife of being wanton or unnatural in bed. She climbed on top, some wrote, like a medieval Yelp review from a deeply uncomfortable customer. That alone could be considered grounds for annulment or worse, excommunication. And what about the reverse? What if your husband demanded things that went beyond the natural? You had no recourse. If you refused, you risked being labeled disobedient. If you complied and he was found out, you'd still be blamed for tempting him. Heads he wins, tails you lose. The bedchamber was not your sanctuary. It was a courtroom, and you were always on trial. Even jokes about positions had political consequences. Court poets and pamphleteers would sometimes mock noble women by implying they were too adventurous in bed. A metaphor about a dancing mare or a backwoods prayer could destroy someone's reputation, because everyone knew what was being said between the lines. Here's a quirky fact to slip under your pillow. A Tudor era guidebook called The Secret Miracles of Nature suggested that women should lie still to avoid causing confusion in the child's soul. That's right, your movement during conception might result in a deformed or morally unstable baby. No pressure. Historians still argue whether these rigid standards were followed closely in private, or whether people just pretended in public and quietly did as they pleased. After all, the human body doesn't care much for church calendars or sermon warnings. There's reason to believe that, behind closed doors, Some couples developed trust and even joy. But those stories rarely made it into the record. What survives is what was seen and judged. And the judgment was relentless. So you lie there, again beneath a sagging canopy of carved oak, feeling your pulse in your ears. You've learned to breathe, SHALLOWLY, to tilt your hips just slightly, for comfort but not too much. You pray, not for guidance, but for the moment to pass uneventfully, for him to be satisfied, for you to be still enough, quiet enough, good enough. Because here, in this room, your morality is measured in motion, and even your body's instinctive reactions can betray you. But deep down, maybe in some hidden corner of your mind, you wonder, if everything natural is sinful, and everything holy hurts, what's left to want? You tuck the thought away like a secret letter, unread, but treasured. Just the faint idea that one day, you might reclaim the right to feel without fear. For now, you sleep with your hands folded neatly on your stomach, eyes closed, legs straight, like the good wife they told you to be. It starts as a whisper, a joke in the alehouse, a sideways glance from a maid who knows too much. Before you even realize it, your bedroom has an audience, because in Tudor England, nothing stays private, for long, especially not the state of your marriage bed. It might be something your husband said offhand at the tavern. Maybe he was bragging, or maybe he was complaining. Either way, it's spread. A servant overhears, a neighbor asks questions, and suddenly, your most vulnerable moments are public currency. That's how it works in a world obsessed with honor, lineage, and reputation. What happens between the sheets doesn't stay. There it spills out into the street, the parish, the court. Let's start with bedroom spies. Not the cloak and dagger kind, but everyday people. Chambermaids, wet nurses, valets, midwives. They see things, hear things, and sometimes, they talk. If you cry at night, they hear it. If there's no blood on the sheets after your wedding, they're the first to report it. And if your husband is dissatisfied, well, let's just say the household knows by morning. In noble homes, especially, servants were witnesses. You didn't dress yourself. You didn't bathe alone. You didn't lock the door. And sometimes, during the bedding ceremony, servants were expected to observe the couple being put to bed, sometimes even lingering until the curtains were drawn, not out of prurience, but protocol. Because consummation wasn't just a private act, it was a legal one. And legal acts require witnesses. It sounds absurd now, but this was serious business. In royal marriages, consummation could determine alliances, legitimacy, even wars. When Mary Tudor married Philip of Spain, there were formal reports from attendants to confirm that the marriage had, in fact, occurred. Written in delicate euphemisms, of course. But the point was clear. The kingdom needed proof. But it wasn't just royals who got scrutinized. Even in lower social circles, gossip could destroy a woman's reputation. If you weren't pregnant within a year, people started asking questions. If your husband seemed distant, the church might send someone to inquire. Yes, clergymen could intervene in your marriage. If there were rumors of failure to consummate, they might separate you temporarily, ask invasive questions, even suggest a physician examine you, all under the banner of spiritual care. Of course, here's where it gets worse. If you couldn't consummate your marriage, it could be annulled, not divorced, annulled, as if it never happened. That meant shame, lost dowries, and lifelong rumors. In some cases, men claimed their wives were too cold, too deformed, or too resistant for the act to occur. These weren't just excuses, they were legal arguments, and women, lacking the right to speak freely or defend their side, often had no recourse. And even if the marriage was consummated, your performance might still be judged. Was it too quick, too awkward, too frequent? There was a fine line between fulfilling your wifely duty and looking like a harlot, and if your husband was influential, his complaints could carry weight beyond your home. Let's take a quirky detour. There are recorded cases of noble women accused of bewitching their husbands into impotence. One man claimed that every time he approached his wife, he felt a burning sensation and heard whispers in the walls. His solution: accuse her of sorcery. Of course, she was put on trial. Her defense: none, because there was no defense against nonsense. Historians still argue whether these stories were true or exaggerated. Were men simply embarrassed by their own failures? Or were these women really suspected of dark powers? Probably a mix of both, but the fact remains. A woman's sexual reputation was a fragile thing, easily shattered by a joke, a rumor, or a bitter man's complaint. And if you tried to protect yourself, if you locked your chamber door, or asked your maid to, Stay outside it could make things worse. What is she hiding? They'd ask. Why is she so guarded? Privacy was suspicious. Modesty was misinterpreted. Silence could be weaponized. The irony is suffocating. You were expected to be pure, submissive, and silent, yet every aspect of your private life was monitored, discussed, and judged. You lived under a magnifying glass held by people who neither understood nor respected your experience. And the court of public opinion, unforgiving. Once your name was associated with failure or impropriety, it stuck. A woman who couldn't please her husband might be ridiculed for years. Men could recover from scandal with a shrug. But women, you carried that stain like ink on white linen, forever visible. You learned to speak in code, to lie with a smile. We're trying, you say, when asked about children. He travels often, when someone hints at distance. You laugh politely when another woman jokes about rough beginnings, and you pray no one finds out what you really feel. Because in Tudor England, your bed is not a sanctuary, it's a stage. And everyone has tickets by now. Your body doesn't feel like it belongs to you. Not really. It's a vessel, managed, judged. And soon, it becomes something even more complicated. A baby-making machine. Because in Tudor England, your primary value as a wife isn't pleasure, companionship, or love, it's reproduction. And if you can't deliver a healthy child, and soon, everything else becomes irrelevant. Pregnancy is the one socially acceptable outcome of S3X. It's the goal, the prize, the holy reward for all the discomfort and silence and vinegar baths. But it doesn't come with comfort. It comes with more pressure, more fear, and a whole new category of risk. You're not just expected to conceive, you're expected to do it right. That means quickly, preferably with a male heir, and without any complications. No pressure, right? The moment you miss a monthly cycle or even suspect if people start watching, your appetite changes. Must be with child. You're irritable. Definitely pregnant. You sneeze at church. Oh, she's carrying. And the questions follow you like buzzing flies. When's it due? Is it kicking yet? Are you craving pickled onions or sweet pears? And yet, even when the village is practically knitting baby booties, you're not allowed to speak of it too confidently. Superstition reigns. Say too much, and you might jinx it. Women were told to avoid talking openly about a pregnancy until it was undeniable belly swelling, cravings undeniable, waddling unmistakable. Some whispered that announcing it early might invite the devil's attention. Others believed that witches could steal the fetus right out of your womb if they knew it existed. That's not even the scary part. The real terror begins after conception, because childbirth is the most dangerous moment of your life. Truly, it kills more Tudor women than disease, famine, or accidents. You know women who've bled out, who've moaned for days, then slipped into silence, who've been buried before their babies even opened their eyes. You know the stories. You've memorized them, because they might be yours. You prepare for labor with rituals and relics. A priest blesses your bedchamber. You wear a girdle etched with prayers, sometimes even holy texts, stitched into the seams of your shift. Saint Margaret, patron of childbirth, is invoked again and again. And the midwife, the only person in the room who truly understands, becomes your anchor. She knows what to do, where to press, when to pray. But even she has limits. There are no hospitals, no anesthesia. The best you can hope for is a swift delivery, clean tools, and a midwife who isn't too old or too drunk. If something goes wrong, if the baby is breech, or the cord strangles, or the bleeding won't stop you, rely on instinct, divine intervention, or dumb luck. And what if the child doesn't survive? Or worse, what if you don't? A mother's death in childbirth was so common that many women wrote their wills the moment they suspected they were pregnant. Just in case. Some even stitched their own burial shrouds while pregnant, a quiet preparation that no one spoke of out loud. If the baby survives but you don't, your legacy becomes your ability to have died successfully. She gave her life for her child. They'll say, a good mother, a silent martyrdom. There's no talk of trauma, no memorial for the terror. Just nods and soft sighs, and the assumption that this was always how it was supposed to end. And if you do survive, you are praised, not for bravery, but for obedience, for fulfilling your role, for doing your duty. But of course, it doesn't end there. You'll be expected to do it again, and again, and again, no matter how painful, no matter how dangerous, because fertility is the gold standard of womanhood in Tudor England. The moment you prove you can have a child, the question becomes, how many? Here's a strange but true fact. It was believed that the more a woman conceived, the less lustful she must be. Frequent pregnancy was seen as a sign of piety and restraint because, of course, you couldn't possibly be enjoying yourself if you were always carrying a child. The irony is painful. Historians still debate how much women truly accepted these expectations, or whether they found small ways to resist herbs to delay conception. Whispered prayers for protection, husbands gently nudged toward abstinence during risky months, but those small rebellions rarely made it into the records. The official story: a good wife conceives early, often, and quietly. So you sit, hands folded over your belly, whether swollen or flat. You wait, you pray, you wonder what kind of mother you'll be. What kind of life this child might have, whether your body will hold together long enough to do this one more time. And all the while, no one asks how you feel. That was never the point. You're bleeding again. Not from childbirth, at least. Not this time. Just the familiar, heavy tide of your cycle. You watch the dark red soak into the linen and wonder, for the 100th time, if it means something more this time. Infertility isn't just a fear now, it's a suspicion, a shadow, a curse. In Tudor England, a woman's womb isn't just part of her anatomy, it's a public matter. Everyone has a stake in it. Your husband, your mother-in-law, your parish priest, the midwife who pretends not to judge. If it's been more than a year since your wedding, and there's still no sign of a child, questions turn into accusations. And the worst part, it's never seen as the man's fault. Even though, biologically speaking, either partner might be the issue. Tudor understanding of reproduction placed all blame squarely on women. If there's no child, the womb must be cold, slippery, or closed. Physicians might diagnose you with a barrenness of the womb and prescribe a regimen of hot baths, bitter herbs, and fasting. Or worse, bloodletting. Yes, bloodletting. Because in a world where medical theory is still dominated by Galen's ancient teachings, restoring the balance of your bodily humors often means draining you with a knife, or applying leeches. If you weren't already faint from grief, the cure might finish the job. If that didn't work, and it usually didn't, your husband might be advised to find other remedies, like taking cooling foods, or wearing a different kind of codpiece. Or, in more elite circles, he might quietly ask for an annulment on the grounds that your womb was unfit. Or worse, he might take a mistress to test if the problem really was you. And if she conceives, your fate is sealed. You're officially barren. Your marriage might remain intact, but your social standing, gone. You're the cracked vessel, the dry field, and once that label sticks, it never leaves. Some women, desperate to prove their fertility, would fake pregnancies, padding their bellies. Speaking of imagined cravings, sitting with a shawl draped so the ruse might last a few months, long enough to distract suspicion, delay decisions, or salvage dignity. When no baby appeared, the excuse would follow: a miscarriage, a quiet loss, something nature took without a sound. And miscarriages did happen often. Sometimes it was due to malnutrition, or disease, or simply bad luck. But Tudor medicine had no patience for mystery. A lost pregnancy might be blamed on your emotions, your thoughts, or your sins. Cried too hard, ate pickled plums during Lent, dreamt of a strange man. All possible causes. The shame was relentless. Your body betrayed you, and so the world treated you as the traitor. Here's your quirky fact of the night. Some believed that a woman could become fertile by swallowing powdered antlers or ground pearls, ingredients that were horrifically expensive, incredibly dangerous, and absolutely useless. But when every month feels like a test, you'll try anything. Folk healers offered amulets, elixirs, even spells written in blood. And in the still of night, you might whisper your own prayers into the fire, hoping something, anything listens. Historians still argue whether women believed these remedies, or simply clung to them out of hope. The line between superstition and survival is thin, especially when your worth is measured by your womb. Some women quietly tried to avoid pregnancy altogether. A few learned about herbal abortifacients, dangerous concoctions of tansy, rue, or pennyroyal oil, administered too often, or too late. They could damage the liver, or even kill you. But the risk sometimes felt smaller than the life that came with another mouth to feed, another wound to heal. Because even if you could get pregnant, there were other fears. Too many pregnancies too close together could ruin your health, your life. And while your husband might be praised for his virility, you were left to stitch your body back together again and again, in silence. There were rare exceptions. Some men grieved with their wives. Some whispered reassurances in dark corners. A few even refused to seek heirs elsewhere. But those stories are scarce in the records, smothered under layers of doctrine and inheritance law. The public narrative remains cold. A woman's purpose is to conceive. If she can't, she's broken, so you sit by the hearth. Another cloth soaking in a basin of rosewater, your stomach cramped and your heart leaden. You wonder what it means that no child has come. You wonder how long you have before someone else wonders aloud. Maybe you press a coin to your belly. Maybe you recite St. Anne's prayer again. Maybe you just close your eyes and imagine holding something warm, soft, and living. You shouldn't have to wish so hard for something that comes so easily to others. But you do. You try not to count the days anymore, or the cycles, or the years. But every passing month feels like a verdict. And soon even you stop believing what they whisper behind closed doors, that maybe God has closed your womb. Or maybe you're being punished for something you can't even name. So when a child finally comes, miracle or mistake, you dare to feel hope again, until that hope fades to silence. A stillborn, weak cry that vanishes in minutes. Or worse, a baby that lives but isn't. Right. Disability in Tudor children is poorly understood, and worse, feared. If your baby doesn't speak when expected, or flinches at loud sounds, or grows too slowly, people start muttering. Some say the child is touched by the fire. Others claim it's divine punishment, your sins made flesh. The devil, perhaps, found a door through your womb. There's even a name, changeling, a belief that fairies or demons could steal healthy children in the night and leave behind their own, unwell, unresponsive, unwanted, and the mother, blamed, not pitied. It doesn't stop with whispers. Some women try folk rituals to reclaim their real child, cold baths, smoked herbs, a spoonful of ash or holy water slipped beneath the infant's tongue. There are darker stories, tube burns, abandonment, or worse, in a desperate attempt to force the child to change back. No one says these things aloud at church, of course. But they're lived quietly, behind doors that never quite close all the way. And if the child dies, you're meant to bury them with dignity. But even infant death comes with judgment. Did you nurse too long? Not enough. Was the child swaddled too tightly? Left in a draft? You're asked more questions than a physician, and offered less mercy than a thief, because in Tudor England, a woman's virtue is tied to the survival of her child. Never mind disease. Never mind poor sanitation, or moldy bread, or winter's cruelty. If your baby dies, it must be something you did, or didn't do, or wanted too badly. Here's your quirky and chilling tidbit. Some midwives kept birthing spoons engraved with prayers and charms. They'd press them to the child's tongue after birth, hoping the sacred silver would bless them. Others kept tiny dolls or saints' bones nearby to confuse the spirits who might want to steal the baby. Protection by misdirection. Even if your child survives and thrives, there's still no rest. If it's a girl, the expectations are heavy but silent. Modesty, obedience, virtue. If it's a boy, the stakes feel higher. He must be strong, smart, capable of carrying the family name and land and legacy. He is your proof of worth. But what if he's not? What if he's clumsy, or quiet, or doesn't fight the way his father wants? You see the disappointment in your husband's eyes, even if he never says a word. You try to teach the child better posture, braver words, firmer handshakes, and all the while, you know his failings will be seen as yours. Historians still argue how much agency women had over their children's upbringing. Noble women often handed infants to wet nurses and governesses. Peasant women kept their babies strapped to their backs while working in fields. But in all cases, one truth remained. When a child faltered, the mother bore the blame. So your fear never leaves. You check for breathing in the night. You sniff for fever. You watch for any sign that anything might be wrong. You pray for milestones. First laugh, first steps, first word. Each one a tiny absolution. Because here, motherhood isn't joy. It's a lifelong test you cannot afford to fail. And even if you pass every test, they'll say you were just lucky. The years stretch on, and your household fills maybe with children, maybe just with echoes, but either way, you've earned the title now. Wife, it sounds respectable, safe. But in Tudor England, being a wife doesn't mean you're secure. It means you're trapped in a contract more sacred than comfort, more permanent than love. Marriage is not romance. It's property transfer, with lace trim. When you married, your legal identity merged into your husband's like cream into porridge. He now controls your money, your land if you had any, and most importantly your body. And that body is still expected to perform, provide, and behave. Even decades into marriage, your autonomy doesn't improve. You can't vote. You can't sue in your own name. If your husband takes your dowry and squanders it, you can do nothing. If he hits you, you must endure it with grace. Only extreme cases, broken bones, public scandal, or death threats, move the church to act. But even then, you're expected to reconcile, to forgive, to pray it away. Some women try to reclaim a sliver of power through domestic management. You run the household like a ship's captain, steering servants, managing accounts, overseeing the pantry and linen chests. Your success in this domain might earn you some respect, but only if it pleases your husband. Be too authoritative, and you're a shrew. Too quiet, and you're incompetent. You've heard the word scold, tossed around like a slap. A scolding wife was more than a nuisance. She was a public problem. Women accused of nagging or speaking too freely could be punished. Even forced to wear the branca metal cage for the head, with a spiked plate that went in the mouth to prevent speech. Public shame is punishment for too many opinions. And that's not even the worst of it. There's the ducking stool. A wooden chair lowered into freezing rivers, as punishment for unruly women, usually those who argued, gossiped, or resisted authority. Wet, humiliated, and bruised. These women were meant to emerge quieter, subdued, more wifely. You know to stay quiet in church. You nod when your husband talks over you. You laugh softly when he misquotes a proverb. And even when your own body aches from childbirth or arthritis or simply time, you're still expected to submit to his desires. Marital pay isn't a crime in Tudor law because it isn't possible. You're his wife, his possession. Your consent was signed away with the marriage contract, sealed with wax and witnessed by God. And if you did try to leave, it's nearly impossible. Divorce as we know it doesn't exist. Annulments are reserved for the nobility, and only with powerful backing. You might seek legal separation, in rare cases, usually for adultery or abandonment, but you're unlikely to gain custody of your children. They belong to your husband. Always so you stay. You find little freedoms in secret. Extra coins hidden in a glove box. A book read by candlelight. After your husband snores, you confide in your maid, or your sister, or no one at all. You might sing while you work. Not loudly, just enough to feel like your voice hasn't entirely disappeared. Here's your quirky fact. Some women brewed husband's tea using herbs, like valerian or poppy, to calm aggressive spouses. A pinch in his ale, a drop in his stew. Nothing deadly, just enough to dull the temper. A sleepy husband is a peaceful house. And no one asks too many questions if the roast tastes slightly bitter. Historians still argue about the extent of a Tudor wife's resistance. Did women wield quiet power beneath the surface? Or were they simply enduring? Likely both. Resistance doesn't always look like rebellion, often looks like survival. You've learned how to navigate this world. You walk the tightrope daily between devotion and disappearance, between duty and despair. But you also carry knowledge, where the bruises bloom, which doors creak before opening, how to slip out at dusk and return with herbs that no one questions. Maybe you look in the mirror and barely recognize yourself. Or maybe, in the lines around your mouth and the calluses on your hands, you see a woman who knows too much to be afraid anymore. Because even in a world that silences you, you've learned how to whisper back. Your hair is streaked with silver now, tucked neatly beneath a linen cord. Your fingers are stiff with years of stitching and scrubbing. You move more slowly, but the eyes on you haven't dimmed. In fact, in Tudor England, aging doesn't grant you peace, it makes you dangerous. You'd think reaching middle age might finally free you. The womb is quiet. The children, if they survived, are nearly grown. You've borne what was expected, endured what was required. Shouldn't that buy you some rest? But now comes a different kind of fear. The widowmaker whispers, begin. If your husband dies before you, you gain a sliver of independence, just enough to make people nervous. A woman alone, with land or coin, is suspicious. Too free, they'll say. Too clever. Some call you wise. Others call you wicked. And the line between the two is perilously thin. You start noticing things. The way market sellers stop haggling with you. How children cross themselves behind your back. The way someone coughs. The word which under their breath when you walk past. You smile and say nothing. You've learned. Because here's the truth. An older woman is feared, not for what she lacks, but for what she's survived. A body no longer ruled by men. A mind sharpened by silence. and a reputation that can no longer be shaped by marriage or motherhood. Some embrace this new identity. They wear darker colors, speak their minds, offer herbs or advice that others are too timid to give. Midwives, herbalists, widows, they know things. And knowledge, especially when held by women, is dangerous currency. But the danger cuts both ways. One poorly timed death, a cow gone lame, a child with fever, a husband who slips on ice, and suddenly your name is on a list. The church courts need someone to blame. Who better than the crone down the lane with a garden full of poppies and a clever tongue? You've heard the stories. Women accused of bewitching ale to spoil, of cursing lovers to fall out of favor, of stealing men's virility. It takes almost nothing to spark suspicion. A dream, a rash, a bad harvest. And once your name is spoken in fear, it's hard to unspeak it. You remember one neighbor, Audrey, kind and quiet, hauled before the court because a sheep miscarried near her fence. She couldn't read, couldn't defend herself. They shaved her head and looked for the witch's mark, some blemish that proved a pact with the devil, a mole, a freckle, a scar from childbirth. Proof enough. She was lucky, banished, not burned. But luck runs out. Here's your quirky detail. Some Tudor women wore garlic in their shoes or tied rowan twigs to their aprons to ward off accusations of witchcraft. Protection by association. Even women who never practiced anything unnatural knew they had to appear harmless. Never too curious, never too helpful, never too different. And you adjust. You lower your voice in the marketplace. You offer no unsolicited advice. You keep your remedies private, your prayers quiet. You may have been silenced for decades, but now you choose when and if to speak. Historians still argue whether most witch trials were driven by superstition or social control. Some say these were just unlucky women. Others say it was a systematized purge of those who defied their role. The truth likely lies somewhere in between, because what's more unsettling than a woman who no longer needs to please? Your husband, if he still lives, might soften in his old age. Or he might grow more bitter, more controlling. Either way, he knows his grip is loosening. You tend him anyway. Not out of love, necessarily, but out of habit, out of duty. Or maybe, just because there's still a sliver of the girl you once were, deep down, who remembers what it was like to care freely. You walk through the fields now with your shawl tight and your eyes watchful. You've learned how to move without drawing attention, how to speak just enough to satisfy, how to disappear while standing in plain sight. They may call you good wife to your face, but behind closed doors, you're something else. A question, a warning, a woman who's lived too long, known too much, and smiled too calmly, through too many storms. You are no longer afraid, but everyone else is. It's late now. The fire has burned low. The children, if they're still home, are quiet, behind thick shutters. The town bell rings once in the dark, and you feel the weight of silence settle over the beams of your roof. You lie back on your straw-filled mattress and wonder, not for the first time, what your life might have been like if you were born in a different time. You've played every role asked of you: daughter, wife, mother, widow. Each one came with its own rules, its own dangers. And though you've never set foot beyond your village or perhaps your manor's garden, you've traveled worlds within your mind. Worlds where no one charts the course of your body for you. Where your voice doesn't get you punished. Where desire isn't dangerous. But those worlds are stories, not survival. Here in Tudor England, survival is a tightrope, especially for women. Every glance, every whisper, every act behind a closed door carries weight. You were born into a body that was treated like currency. Prized if it bled on the wedding night. Dismissed if it didn't swell in the belly. Watched constantly. Judged endlessly. Used always. You think of all the rules sewn into your skin like invisible thread. Don't speak too loud. Don't walk too fast. Don't laugh at the wrong moment. Don't refuse your husband. Don't show too much pleasure. Don't until you forget what it felt like to just be. And yet somehow, despite all of it, you've endured. You've found softness in small places. A sleeping child's hand curled round your finger. The hush of a shared secret with another woman. The scent of rosemary in your apron. The pages of a book read only once and then hidden forever. Tiny rebellions. Fleeting freedoms. You've watched others false and broken by childbirth. Others by the weight of being unwanted or unwell. You've mourned friends accused of things they couldn't name. You've sat through sermons where men with clean hands and cruel eyes told you to suffer more quietly. And you did, but you never stopped remembering. Here's a final quirky truth to cradle in the dark. Some women, especially those nearing the end of life, would commission their own coffin boards in advance, not out of morbidity, but control. They'd pick the shape, the size, even the shroud. A final, silent decision in a life where choices were rarely theirs. Historians still debate whether Tudor women were truly powerless or whether their power simply looked different. Was it, in the whispered counsel between midwives, the secret codes sewn into needlework, the prayers spoken backwards at the hearth? Perhaps. But tonight, in the stillness, you finally feel something like understanding. Not peace, maybe, but knowing that you were never alone in this. That generations of women breathed this same air, walked this same narrow corridor between obedience and annihilation, and left behind pieces of themselves, whispers, recipes, scars, lullabies. And now, you lie with your hands folded gently, not because someone told you to, but because you're tired and, maybe, for the first time, safe in your own stillness. You close your eyes. The world quiets around you. And for once, no one is watching. So now, let everything slow. The flicker of the candle in that Tudor chamber dims to a soft glow. The stone walls seem less cold now. The voices that once judged, the footsteps that once paced outside your door, they all drift away. Like dust in evening light. You've walked through centuries tonight. Through the hush of an arranged marriage. The throb of childbirth pain. The razor edge of silence. You've felt the weight of judgment and the fragile hope of love. And still, you breathed through it. Still, you endured. Let your limbs sink deeper into the mattress now, whatever kind you're lying on. Whether it's straw, feather, or something more modern, let it hold you like a cradle. Without demand or judgment, let your jaw unclench, your brows unfurrow. Let your breathing deepen like soft waves, in and out, steady and calm. There's no more questioning, no more watching, no more expectations. Just this hush, this space, this peace. You've earned rest not because you were perfect or obedient or enough for anyone else, but simply because you are . So let the stories of the past drift further and further behind you. Let them dissolve into quiet. You don't need to carry them now. All that matters is the breath in your chest, the weight in your limbs, and the knowledge that this moment, this stillness is entirely yours. Sleep well, and sweet dreams.